The blistering Texas sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of San Angelo as Felicity Adams clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. Blood trickled from a cut on her cheek, mingling with tears as she glanced frantically over her shoulder. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, the worn leather boots on her feet, and the faded blue shawl her mother had given her before she died, yet somehow she had to escape. It was 1875, and Felicity had just fled the only home she'd known for the past year. The memory of Harold Winter's rage-contorted face as she'd struck him with the cast-iron skillet and bolted from the farmhouse made her quicken her pace. Her heart thundered in her chest. There would be no going back now. "Miss, you all right?" A deep voice startled her, causing her to nearly stumble into the water trough outside the general store. Felicity whirled around, instantly taking a defensive stance. Standing before her was a tall man with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that stood in stark contrast to the imposing figure he cut. His dark hair peeked out from beneath a well-worn Stetson, and a star-shaped badge gleamed on his chest. "I'm fine," she lied, even as her voice cracked and betrayed her. The man's brow furrowed as he studied her face, his gaze lingering on the cut on her cheek. "You don't look fine to me, miss." "I'm Sheriff Vaughn Mackenzie, and you look like you could use some help." Felicity felt her resolve wavering. She hadn't expected kindness from anyone, least of all the law. In her experience, sheriffs were in the pockets of men like Harold, wealthy ranchers who thought they owned everything and everyone around them. "I can't stay here," she whispered, glancing nervously down the road. "He'll find me." Sheriff Mackenzie's expression hardened. "Harold Winters." Her eyes widened in surprise. "How did you— This isn't the first time a woman's run from that man, though you're the first who looks like you put up a decent fight." There was a hint of admiration in his voice. "Come on. My office is just down the street. We need to get you somewhere safe." Felicity hesitated. "He'll come looking. He always does." "Let him," Sheriff Mackenzie replied, his hand resting casually on his holster. "I've been wanting to have a proper conversation with Mr. Winters for quite some time." Something about the quiet confidence in his voice made Felicity nod. She followed him down the street, acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. San Angelo wasn't large enough for a stranger to go unnoticed, especially one with a bloodied face being escorted by the sheriff. Inside the modest sheriff's office, Vaughn gestured toward a chair near his desk. "Sit, please. I'll fetch some water for that cut." As he moved around, gathering supplies from a small cabinet, Felicity took stock of her surroundings. The office was sparse but tidy. Wanted posters adorned one wall, a small iron stove sat in the corner, and a rifle rack held 3 well-maintained Winchester rifles. "How long were you with him?" Vaughn asked, returning with a basin of water and a clean cloth. Felicity winced as he gently dabbed at her cheek. "A year. I was his housekeeper. After my parents died of the fever, I had nowhere else to go. He offered me work and a place to stay." "And then," Vaughn prompted, his voice gentle but firm, "and then he decided I should be more than just his housekeeper." She met his gaze defiantly, daring him to judge her. "Today he tried to force himself on me. I hit him with a skillet and ran." Vaughn nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "You did what you had to do. Is he badly hurt?" "I don't know. He was unconscious when I left." "Good," Vaughn said simply, setting aside the bloodied cloth. "Now what's your plan, Miss Adams, Felicity Adams?" She twisted the fringe of her shawl between her fingers. "I don't have a plan. I just knew I had to leave." Vaughn considered her for a long moment. "Do you have any family you can go to? Anyone who might take you in?" Felicity shook her head. "No one. My folks were it, and they're gone now." "What about money? Any savings?" Again she shook her head. Harold kept my wages, said he was safeguarding them. Her bitter laugh held no humor. I have nothing but this shawl and the clothes I'm wearing. The sheriff's expression softened. Well, that won't do at all. He stood and reached for his hat. Miss Adams, I'm going to help you, but first, we need to make sure you're safe from Winters. True to Felicity's prediction, it wasn't long before the office door burst open. Harold Winters stormed in, a bandage hastily wrapped around his head, rage etched into every line of his face. His right-hand man, a surly ranch hand named Tucker, flanked him like a shadow. There you are, you ungrateful whore, Harold spat, lunging toward Felicity. Vaughn was on his feet in an instant, placing himself firmly between them. That's far enough, Winters. Out of my way, Mackenzie. This is between me and my employee. Ex-employee, Felicity corrected, her voice steadier than she felt. Harold's face reddened. She's a thief, stole money from me, and attacked me in my sleep. That's not true, Felicity protested. Interesting accusation, Vaughn said coolly. Considering Miss Adams here claims you haven't paid her wages for a year. And as for attacking you, well, a woman has a right to defend herself, wouldn't you agree? Harold's eyes narrowed. You always were soft, Mackenzie. This doesn't concern you. I'm taking her back. No, you're not. Vaughn's hand rested casually on his holster again. Miss Adams is under my protection now, and I suggest you leave before I decide to investigate those rumors about rustled cattle on your north pasture. Harold's face paled slightly. You're making a mistake, Sheriff. Wouldn't be my first, but somehow I don't think this is one of them. Vaughn's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. Now get out of my office, Winters, and if I hear you've been asking about Miss Adams around town, you and I will have a problem. Understood. The two men stared each other down for what seemed like an eternity to Felicity. Finally, Harold spat on the floor. This isn't over, he growled, before turning and stalking out, Tucker following close behind. When they were gone, Felicity released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He won't give up, he'll be back. Probably, Vaughn agreed, returning to his seat. But by then you'll be long gone from San Angelo. Gone, where would I go? Vaughn leaned back in his chair, considering her. I have a sister who lives out near Fort Concho. Martha runs a seamstress shop there. She's always looking for help. He smiled slightly. And she's been saying I need to find myself a wife for years now. Felicity blinked. Are you suggesting? No, no, Vaughn laughed, a warm sound that somehow made Felicity feel safer. I'm suggesting she might be willing to give you work and a place to stay until you figure out what's next. That's all. Relief and disappointment mingled oddly in Felicity's chest. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not imposing if I'm offering. Besides, he added with a wry smile, Martha would never forgive me if she found out I let a woman in trouble fend for herself. Felicity considered her options, which were admittedly few. When could I leave for Fort Concho? Tomorrow morning, I'll take you myself. He stood and grabbed his coat from a hook on the wall. But first, you need some supplies. You can't travel with just that shawl, beautiful as it is. For the first time that day, Felicity felt a genuine smile tug at her lips. It was my mother's. It's all I have left of her. Vaughn nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then we'll make sure you keep it safe. Come on, the general store should still be open. As they stepped outside, Felicity was struck by how different the town looked now that she wasn't fleeing in terror. San Angelo was a modest but growing town, situated where the North and South Concho rivers met. Cattle drives passing through had brought prosperity to some, and the railroad's promised arrival had many speculating on the town's future. At the general store, Vaughn insisted on purchasing necessities for her journey. A sturdy carpetbag, a few modest dresses, undergarments, toiletries, and even a small silver hairbrush that Felicity had admired but would never have asked for. "Sheriff, I can't accept all this," she protested as the shopkeeper wrapped their purchases. "Consider it an advance from Martha," he said simply. "You can pay her back with your work." That night, Vaughn arranged for Felicity to stay in a small room above the town's only restaurant. He slept in a chair outside her door, his rifle across his lap, taking no chances with Harold Winters still in town. In the morning, they set out for Fort Concho in Vaughn's wagon. Felicity sat beside him, clutching her mother's shawl despite the warmth of the day, her new carpetbag tucked safely behind them. "It's about a day's journey," Vaughn explained as San Angelo faded into the distance. "We'll stop at midday to rest the horses." Felicity nodded, watching the landscape change as they traveled. The terrain was rugged but beautiful in its own way, rolling hills covered with scrub brush, occasional stands of mesquite trees, and in the distance, the promise of mountains. "Have you always been the sheriff of San Angelo?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Vaughn shook his head. "No, I was a Texas Ranger for 8 years before that. Decided I wanted to put down roots somewhere." "And you chose San Angelo." "It chose me in a way." He smiled at some memory. "I was tracking a gang that had robbed a bank in Austin. Chase led me here. The town had no sheriff, and after I caught the robbers, the mayor offered me the job." "Do you ever miss being a ranger?" Vaughn considered this. "Sometimes. I miss the freedom of the open trail. But there's something to be said for knowing where you'll lay your head each night." He glanced at her. "What about you? Before Winters, what was your life like?" Felicity's gaze drifted to the horizon. "Simple. My father had a small farm outside of Abilene. We weren't rich, but we got by. My mother taught me to read and write, to cook and sew. My father taught me to shoot a rifle and ride a horse." She smiled sadly. "He said no daughter of his would be helpless in this world." "Sounds like a wise man." He was. They both were good people. Her voice caught. "The fever took them both within a week of each other. The bank took our farm for unpaid loans. I had nowhere to go, so when Harold offered me work." She trailed off, the rest of the story known. "You did what you had to do to survive," Vaughn finished for her. "There's no shame in that." They stopped at midday by a small creek. Vaughn unhitched the horses to let them drink and graze while he prepared a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and coffee. As they ate, Felicity found herself studying the sheriff. He was older than her, perhaps in his early 30s to her 22 years, but his face was kind, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes. There was a quiet confidence to him that spoke of a man who knew his own mind and moral compass. "You're staring, Miss Adams," Vaughn observed, his mouth quirking into a half-smile. Felicity felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking that not many men would go to such trouble for a stranger." "Is that what we are, strangers?" Vaughn handed her a cup of coffee. "After all we've been through, I'd like to think we're at least acquaintances." She accepted the cup with a small smile. "Acquaintances, then. Still, I'm grateful." "Don't be grateful yet. You haven't met Martha." His eyes twinkled with mischief. "My sister has strong opinions about everything and isn't shy about sharing them. But she has a good heart, and she'll look after you." They continued their journey through the afternoon. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Fort Concho came into view in the distance. "We'll be there within the hour," Vaughn said, urging the horses to a slightly faster pace. Fort Concho was larger than San Angelo, with the military installation bringing a different kind of energy to the town that had grown up around it. Soldiers in uniform moved about, alongside civilians going about their evening business. Vaughn navigated the wagon through the streets with the ease of familiarity, until they pulled up in front of a modest but well-maintained storefront with Martha's fine stitchery painted on the window. A bell jangled as they entered the shop. A plump, cheerful-looking woman with dark hair streaked with silver looked up from her sewing and immediately broke into a wide smile. "Vaughn Mackenzie, about time you visited your neglected sister." She bustled around the counter to embrace him, then turned her appraising gaze on Felicity. "And who's this lovely young lady?" "Martha, this is Felicity Adams." "Felicity, my sister Martha Collins." Martha's keen eyes took in Felicity's appearance, lingering on the healing cut on her cheek. "Trouble, Harold Winters," Vaughn replied, as if that explained everything. Apparently it did. Martha's expression darkened momentarily before she pasted on a smile. "Well, you've come to the right place, dear. Any enemy of that snake is a friend of mine." Vaughn quickly explained the situation while Martha led them upstairs to her living quarters above the shop. The space was cozy and feminine, with colorful quilts and cushions softening the practical frontier furnishings. "Of course you can stay," Martha said decisively after hearing Felicity's story. "I've been needing help in the shop, and if you can sew half as well as you can defend yourself with a skillet, you'll do just fine." Felicity felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Collins. I promise I'll work hard. Martha, please. And I know you will, dear." She patted Felicity's hand. "Now, why don't you freshen up while I fix us some supper? The washroom is through there, and you can use the small bedroom at the end of the hall." When Felicity had gone, Martha turned to her brother with a knowing look. "She's pretty." Vaughn sighed. "Don't start, Martha." "What? I'm just making an observation." She busied herself with preparing the meal. "How long are you staying?" "Just tonight. I need to get back to San Angelo tomorrow." Martha frowned. "That's not much of a visit." "I know, but Winters is still out there, and he's not the type to let things go. I need to make sure he doesn't cause trouble for anyone else while he's nursing his wounded pride." Martha studied her brother's face. "You like her, don't you?" Vaughn didn't answer immediately. "She's been through enough, Martha. She doesn't need complications." "Since when is caring about someone a complication?" "Since she's running from a man who tried to own her." Vaughn's voice was firm. "She needs safety and independence, not another man making decisions for her." Martha's expression softened. "You're not like Winters, Vaughn, I know that. But does she?" The next morning came too soon. After a hearty breakfast prepared by Martha, it was time for Vaughn to depart. Felicity walked him down to his wagon, her mother's shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the day. "Thank you," she said simply, looking up at him, "for everything." Vaughn tipped his hat. "It was nothing, Miss Adams." "Felicity," she corrected him. "After all we've been through, I'd like to think we're at least acquaintances." She echoed his words from the day before with a small smile. He returned the smile. "Felicity, then, take care of yourself, and don't let Martha work you too hard." "I heard that." Martha called from the doorway of the shop. As Vaughn climbed into the wagon, Felicity felt an unexpected pang of loss. Will you come back to visit sometime?" Something flickered in his eyes. "If you'd like me to." "I would," she said softly. He nodded once, then flicked the reins. "Then I will." Felicity watched until his wagon disappeared from view, then turned to face her new life in Fort Concho. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to her word, Martha was a kind but demanding employer. She put Felicity to work in the shop, first with simple mending tasks, then gradually introducing her to more complex seamstress work. Felicity took to it well, her mother's careful teaching serving her in good stead. Martha's shop served both the civilian population and the soldiers from the fort, providing alterations, repairs, and custom clothing. The work was steady, and Felicity found herself enjoying the rhythm of the days. "You have a real gift with the needle," Martha commented one afternoon as she examined a dress Felicity had altered. "My customers have been asking for you specifically." Felicity blushed at the praise. "My mother taught me well. She must have been quite a woman." Martha settled into a chair, signaling it was time for their afternoon tea break. "Vaughn mentioned she gave you that blue shawl you're so fond of." "Yes." Felicity's hand went automatically to the shawl draped over the back of her chair. "She made it herself. It's all I have left of her." Martha nodded understandingly. "I still have my mother's wedding ring. Sometimes objects carry more than memories, they carry love." As the days passed, Felicity found herself thinking often of Sheriff Mackenzie. She wondered if he'd meant what he said about visiting, or if it had been mere politeness. Martha occasionally mentioned letters from her brother, but never indicated if he'd said anything about Felicity. Then, nearly a month after her arrival in Fort Concho, the shop bell jangled late one afternoon. Felicity looked up from her work to see Vaughn standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Sheriff Mackenzie," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Miss Adams." He smiled and it reached his eyes. "You're looking well." It was true. The regular meals and restful sleep had brought color to her cheeks. Her hair, once lank from stress and poor care, now shone like polished mahogany, pulled back in a simple but becoming style. "As are you," she replied, noticing he'd trimmed his beard and was wearing what appeared to be a new shirt under his familiar leather vest. Martha emerged from the back room and let out a delighted cry when she saw her brother. "Vaughn! What a wonderful surprise!" After the initial greetings and explanations, he'd come to Fort Concho on official business, and would be staying for 3 days. Martha insisted he join them for supper. That evening, as they sat around Martha's small dining table, Felicity found herself relaxing in Vaughn's presence in a way she hadn't expected. He told stories of his time as a Texas Ranger that had both women alternating between laughter and gasps of concern. "What about Harold Winters?" Felicity finally asked, the question that had been on her mind all evening. "Has he caused any more trouble?" Vaughn's expression grew serious. "Actually, that's partly why I'm here. Winters left San Angelo a week after you did. Packed up and headed south with most of his men. Said he was going to his other property near the border." Felicity felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "So he's gone." "From San Angelo, yes, but I've been hearing rumors." Vaughn glanced at Martha, who nodded encouragingly. "Word is, he's been asking about Fort Concho. About a woman matching your description." The weight crashed back down. "He's coming here. I don't know for certain, but I wanted to warn you just in case." Martha reached over to squeeze Felicity's hand. "Don't worry, dear. Fort Concho is much larger than San Angelo, with a full military complement, and you're not alone anymore." Felicity tried to take comfort in those words, but that night sleep eluded her. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them pleasant. The next day, Vaughn stopped by the shop again. Martha, sensing the two needed to talk, conveniently remembered errands that required her immediate attention. "I've spoken with the fort commander," Vaughn said once they were alone. "He's aware of the situation and has agreed to keep an eye out for Winters or any of his men." Felicity nodded, her hands busy with the mending in her lap, though her mind was far from it. "I can't keep running forever, Vaughn." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the intimacy of it seemed to hang in the air between them. "No, you can't," he agreed softly. "And you shouldn't have to. What if he does come here? What then?" Vaughn considered his words carefully. "There are options, legal options. Winters has a reputation that extends beyond San Angelo. If enough women came forward with similar stories, who would believe them? Believe us?" Felicity shook her head. "Men like Harold Winters don't face consequences. They have money and influence." Sometimes they do, Vaughn conceded. But not always. Not if the right people stand against them. Their conversation was interrupted by the return of Martha, her arms laden with packages. The moment passed, but Felicity found herself pondering Vaughn's words long after. That evening, Vaughn suggested they take a walk around the fort. With Martha's enthusiastic approval, almost too enthusiastic, Felicity thought with inner amusement they set out as the sun began to set, painting the sky with brilliant hues of orange and pink. "Fort Concho seems to agree with you," Vaughn observed as they strolled along the parade ground, nodding to soldiers who saluted as they passed. "It does. Martha has been wonderfully kind and the work suits me." Felicity adjusted her shawl against the cooling evening air. "But I still feel like I'm living on borrowed time, waiting for Harold to appear and destroy it all." Vaughn stopped walking and turned to face her. "Felicity, I want you to know something. If Winters comes here when he comes here, you won't face him alone. I promise you that." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Why are you doing all this for me, Vaughn? We barely know each other." "Don't we?" His voice was soft. "Sometimes people come into our lives and it's as if they've always been there, just waiting to be discovered." Felicity felt her heart quicken. "I don't know what to say to that." "You don't have to say anything." He offered his arm to continue their walk. "Just know that I meant what I said. You're not alone in this." The next day passed too quickly. Vaughn spent most of it meeting with the fort commander and the local law enforcement, but he made time to stop by the shop in the afternoon. Felicity was alone, Martha having gone to deliver a finished dress to a customer. "I'm leaving in the morning," Vaughn said without preamble. Felicity nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Back to San Angelo?" "Yes. My deputy can only handle things for so long." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I want you to have this." He held out a small Derringer pistol, barely larger than his palm. Felicity looked at it in surprise. "Vaughn, it's small enough to keep in a pocket or reticule. I've already loaded it." His expression was serious. "I pray you never need to use it, but if Winters shows up and I'm not here." She reached out and took the weapon, feeling its weight in her hand. "Thank you. My father taught me to shoot, but I've never owned a gun of my own." "There's something else." He reached into his other pocket and withdrew a folded document. "This is a sworn statement from the last woman who fled from Winters before you. Her name is Rebecca Taylor. She's living in Fort Worth now, but she's willing to testify against him if it comes to that." Felicity unfolded the paper with trembling hands. "How did you find her?" "I've been making inquiries since you arrived in Fort Concho. Rebecca isn't the only one, but she's the only one so far willing to put her name to paper." His jaw tightened. "Winters has left a trail of frightened women behind him. It's time someone stopped him." Felicity looked up at Vaughn, seeing him in a new light. "You've been building a case against him all this time. Trying to. It won't be easy, but with your testimony and Rebecca's, plus whatever else I can gather." He shrugged. "It's a start." Impulsively, Felicity stepped forward and kissed his cheek. "Thank you, Vaughn Mackenzie, not just for helping me, but for caring about all of us." A faint flush appeared on his weathered cheeks. "It's what any decent man would do." "No," she said firmly, "it isn't. That's what makes it special." The next morning, Felicity and Martha stood outside the shop to see Vaughn off. He'd loaded his wagon and was making final adjustments to the horses' harnesses. "You'll write more often," Martha was saying, fussing with his collar. "And not just about business this time." "I'll try, Martha," he said with the patient tone of a man who'd had this conversation many times before. Then he turned to Felicity. "Take care of yourself, and remember what I said. You're not alone." "I will." She pressed a small package into his hands. "For your journey." "Just some biscuits and preserves." Their fingers touched during the exchange, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Something unspoken passed between them, a promise of sorts. And then he was gone, the wagon disappearing down the dusty road as Felicity and Martha watched. "That brother of mine," Martha said with a sigh as they turned back to the shop. "Always the hero, never the husband." "Martha," Felicity felt her cheeks grow warm. "Oh, don't Martha me." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "I've seen how he looks at you, and how you look at him, for that matter." Felicity busied herself with straightening spools of thread. "He's just being kind, doing his duty." "Vaughn's always done his duty, but I've never seen him ride 100 miles just to check on someone he's just being kind to before." Martha's voice softened. "He likes you, Felicity." "More than likes you, I'd wager. And unless I'm completely wrong, you feel the same way." Felicity couldn't deny it, not to herself. In the short time she'd known Vaughn Mackenzie, he'd shown her what a good man truly was, not through grand gestures or declarations, but through consistent, honorable actions. "Even if that were true," she said carefully, "I'm not in a position to court anyone right now. Not with Harold still out there, looking for me." Martha squeezed her hand. "All the more reason to hold on to something good when you find it, my dear. Life's too unpredictable to waste time denying your heart." Over the next 2 months, Felicity settled further into life in Fort Concho. Her skills as a seamstress continued to improve, and Martha began giving her more responsibility in the shop. She even started teaching Felicity the business side of things, keeping the books, ordering supplies, negotiating with customers. Letters came from Vaughn regularly addressed to both Martha and Felicity, but with special notes for Felicity tucked inside that Martha pretended not to notice. He wrote of life in San Angelo, of the everyday duties of a sheriff, and of his continuing efforts to build a case against Harold Winters. Felicity treasured these letters, reading and rereading them until the paper grew soft at the creases. She wrote back, telling him of her life in Fort Concho, the progress she was making in the shop, and the small joys she was discovering in her new independence. What neither of them wrote about was the growing feeling between them, the thing that made Felicity's heart leap when a letter arrived. The reason Vaughn found himself checking the mail wagon with unusual frequency. It was as if they had agreed, without speaking of it, to set aside those feelings until the shadow of Harold Winters no longer darkened Felicity's life. Then, one morning in late summer, everything changed. Felicity was opening the shop, sweeping the wooden sidewalk in front of the storefront, when she felt the weight of someone's gaze. Looking up, she froze. Across the street, leaning against a hitching post with the casual arrogance she remembered all too well, stood Tucker, Harold Winters' right-hand man. He tipped his hat to her with a mocking smile, then sauntered away. Felicity rushed inside, her heart pounding. Martha was in the back room preparing for the day's work. "Martha," Felicity called, her voice trembling, "I just saw Tucker, Harold's man. He's here in Fort Concho." Martha's face paled. "Are you certain it was him?" "Positive. He made sure I saw him too." Felicity sank into a chair, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. "Harold must be here as well." Martha moved quickly to the door, locking it and turning the sign to closed. "I'm going to send word to the fort commander. You stay here out of sight." For the rest of the day, Felicity remained inside, jumping at every sound. Martha returned from the fort with news that soldiers would be keeping an eye on the shop, but they couldn't arrest Tucker or Winters without cause. "They suggested you stay with a family on the fort grounds tonight," Martha explained. "Captain Wilson's wife has offered their spare room." Felicity shook her head. "No, I won't be driven from my home again. Besides, I have this now." She patted her pocket where Vaughn's Derringer rested. That night, Felicity lay awake in her bed, listening to every creak and groan of the building. Martha had insisted on sleeping in the same room, a shotgun propped by her bed. Around midnight, Felicity heard the soft scrape of a boot on the wooden stairs leading up from the back of the shop. "Martha," she whispered, reaching over to shake the older woman. "Someone's coming." Martha was instantly alert, reaching for the shotgun. "Get behind me." The footsteps paused outside their door. The handle turned slowly. When it met the resistance of the lock, there was a moment of silence. Then a powerful kick splintered the wood around the latch. Harold Winters stood in the doorway, Tucker just behind him. In the dim light of the oil lamp Martha hastily lit, Harold's face looked haggard, his eyes burning with a dangerous light. "Hello, Felicity," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "Did you miss me?" Martha leveled the shotgun at him. "Get out of my home, Winters, or I swear I'll put a hole in you big enough to drive a wagon through." Harold barely glanced at her. "Lower that gun, old woman. This isn't your fight." "It became my fight when you broke into my home," Martha replied steadily. Harold sighed dramatically. "Tucker, deal with her." Before either woman could react, Tucker lunged forward, knocking the shotgun aside. It discharged with a deafening roar, the shot going wild and splintering the floorboards. Tucker wrestled the weapon from Martha's hands and shoved her roughly to the floor. "Martha!" Felicity cried, moving to help her. "Not so fast," Harold said, grabbing Felicity's arm. "You and I have unfinished business." Felicity struggled against his grip. "Let go of me." "You have no right, I have every right," he snarled, his face contorting with rage. "I took you in when you had nothing. Gave you a home, food, protection. And how did you repay me? By nearly killing me and running off with my money." "I never took any money," Felicity spat back. "And what you wanted in return for your generosity was never yours to take." His hand cracked across her face, the force of the blow sending her staggering. "Ungrateful bitch. I've spent 2 months tracking you down. Do you know what that cost me? In time, in money, in reputation." Martha had struggled to her feet. "The soldiers will have heard that shot. They'll be here any minute." Harold laughed, an ugly sound. "By then we'll be long gone. Tucker, tie the old woman up. We're taking Felicity with us." As Tucker moved to comply, Felicity reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the derringer. She remembered Vaughn's words. "I pray you never need to use it." Harold dragged her toward the door. In one swift motion, Felicity pulled out the derringer and pressed it against his side. "Let me go, Harold," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He looked down at the small gun and laughed. "What's this? A toy? It's loaded. And at this range it will do more than enough damage." She pressed the barrel harder against him. "I don't want to shoot you, but I will if you force me to." Something in her voice must have convinced him she was serious. His grip on her arm loosened slightly. "You don't have the nerve. Try me." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the sudden commotion from downstairs. Heavy boots pounded on the steps and a familiar voice called out, "Felicity!" "Martha!" Harold's face twisted in fury. "Mackenzie!" he growled. Felicity's heart leaped at the sound of Vaughn's voice. In that moment of distraction, Harold made his move, twisting her wrist to dislodge the derringer. It went off with a sharp crack, the bullet grazing Harold's side. He roared in pain and struck her again, sending her crashing to the floor. Then Vaughn was in the doorway, his gun drawn. Tucker, seeing the new threat, released Martha and went for his own weapon. Vaughn fired first, his bullet finding Tucker's shoulder. The man howled and dropped his gun. Harold, bleeding from his side, backed away from Felicity. "This is a private matter, Sheriff. No concern of yours." "You made it my concern when you went after someone under my protection," Vaughn replied coldly. "Now step away from her, slowly." Harold's eyes darted around the room, calculating. "You won't shoot an unarmed man, Mackenzie." not the upstanding lawman you pretend to be. Try me. Vaughn echoed Felicity's earlier words, his gun unwavering. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, with surprising speed for an injured man, Harold lunged toward the window. Before Vaughn could react, Harold crashed through the glass and disappeared into the night. Vaughn rushed to the window, but the darkness below revealed nothing. Damn it! He turned to Tucker, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder. Where was he planning to take her? Tucker spat on the floor. Go to hell. Soldiers from the fort arrived moments later, taking control of the situation. Tucker was taken into custody, and a search party was organized to look for Harold Winters. In the aftermath, Felicity sat on the edge of her bed, a blanket around her shoulders as Martha tended to the cut on her cheek where Harold had struck her. "How did you know to come?" she asked Vaughn, who hadn't left her side since the confrontation. He knelt before her, his eyes filled with concern. "I received word that Winters had been seen heading toward Fort Concho with Tucker and another man. I rode out immediately." He took her hand gently. "I'm sorry I didn't get here sooner." "You got here when it mattered most," she said softly. Martha finished dabbing at Felicity's cheek and stepped back. "I'll go make some tea, and perhaps check on those soldiers' progress." Her knowing glance between them was anything but subtle as she left the room. Alone with Vaughn, Felicity felt suddenly shy. "You rode all night." "I would have ridden to Mexico if that's where you were," he said simply. The raw honesty in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. "Vaughn, he shook his head. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to be safe. But I do have to say something." Felicity gathered her courage. "These past months, your letters, they've meant everything to me. You've meant everything to me." Vaughn's expression softened. "Felicity, let me finish. When I fled from Harold with nothing but my mother's shawl, I thought my life was over. But then you found me. You gave me a new beginning, a chance at a real life. You gave me everything I needed, not just the practical things, but hope, safety, the belief that not all men are like Harold Winters." He took both her hands in his. "I wanted to tell you how I felt. But with Winters still out there, it didn't seem right to burden you with my feelings. You deserved the chance to find your own way without obligations to anyone." "And now?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Now I can't pretend anymore. I love you, Felicity Adams. I think I've loved you since that first day in San Angelo, when you stood up to me with nothing but courage and that blue shawl to your name." Tears filled her eyes. "I love you too, Vaughn. I think I've known it for a while now, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself." He reached up to gently wipe away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "We don't have to rush anything. Winters is still out there, and there's the matter of the distance between San Angelo and Fort Concho to consider." Felicity smiled through her tears. "Those seem like small problems compared to what we've already overcome." The search for Harold Winters continued through the night and into the next day, but he had vanished. The third man who had accompanied him and Tucker to Fort Concho was found in a local saloon and arrested, but he claimed ignorance of Winters' plans or whereabouts. Vaughn remained in Fort Concho, unwilling to leave while Winters was still at large. He took a room at the nearby hotel, but spent most of his time with Felicity and Martha, helping to repair the damage to their home and shop. A week passed with no sign of Winters. Tucker, facing charges of breaking and entering, assault, and attempted kidnapping, remained uncooperative, refusing to reveal anything about his employer's plans. He could be anywhere by now, Vaughn admitted one evening as he, Felicity, and Martha sat on the small porch behind the shop. "The border's not far, and he has the money to disappear if he wants to." "Do you think he's given up?" Martha asked, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. Vaughn shook his head. "Men like Winters don't give up. They just changed tactics. Felicity had been quiet, contemplating something that had been on her mind for days. What if we don't wait for him to make the next move? What if we set a trap? Both Vaughn and Martha looked at her in surprise. What kind of trap did you have in mind? Vaughn asked. He wants me. That much is clear, so let's give him a chance to get me on our terms. Felicity's voice was steady. Let it be known that I'm leaving Fort Concho, traveling to San Angelo perhaps. He'll make his move on the road where he thinks I'll be vulnerable. Vaughn frowned. It's too dangerous. I won't use you as bait. It's not your decision to make, Felicity said firmly. I'm tired of living in fear, Vaughn, tired of jumping at shadows and wondering when he'll appear next. I want this over one way or another. She has a point, Martha said slowly. And it wouldn't have to be as dangerous as it sounds, not if it's planned carefully. Vaughn looked between the two women, clearly torn. I don't like it, but I understand why you want to do this. He took Felicity's hand. If we consider this plan, it would need to be airtight. No room for error. Over the next few days, they refined the plan. Word was carefully spread that Felicity had decided to relocate to San Angelo permanently, to be closer to Vaughn, a detail that made both of them blush when Martha insisted it would make the story more believable. She would travel by stagecoach, leaving at the end of the week. What wasn't spread around was that the stagecoach would have an armed escort, with rangers positioned along the route at strategic points. Vaughn called in favors from his ranger days to ensure they had enough manpower. The night before the planned departure, Vaughn and Felicity sat alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. It's not too late to change your mind, Vaughn said, his voice soft. We could find another way. Felicity shook her head. This is the right thing to do, I know it. She turned to face him. But there is something I want to ask you, anything. If tomorrow goes as planned, if we finally end this threat, what happens next? For us, I mean. Vaughn took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. That depends on you. I know what I want, but I would never presume. What do you want, Vaughn? She interrupted, her heart pounding. He met her gaze steadily. I want you to come to San Angelo not as part of a trap or a plan, but because you want to be there. With me. I want to court you properly if you'll allow it. And someday, when you're ready, I want to make you my wife. Felicity's breath caught. You want to marry me? More than I've ever wanted anything, he said simply. But only if it's what you want too. You've had enough of men making decisions for you. She moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. I want that too, all of it. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Then let's get through tomorrow. After that, we have all the time in the world. The stagecoach departed Fort Concho at dawn the next day. Felicity sat inside, dressed for travel, her mother's blue shawl around her shoulders. The Derringer was in her pocket, though Vaughn had insisted she not take any unnecessary risks. He himself rode alongside the coach, with two rangers posing as fellow passengers inside. Martha had bid them farewell with tears in her eyes but determination in her voice. Bring her back safe, Vaughn Mackenzie, she'd instructed her brother. And don't forget to invite me to the wedding. The trap was set. Now they just needed Harold Winters to take the bait. They didn't have to wait long. Barely 2 hours outside of Fort Concho, as the stagecoach rounded a bend in the road flanked by large boulders, shots rang out. The driver cursed and pulled the team to a halt as 3 riders emerged from behind the rocks, guns drawn. Harold Winters rode at their center, his face haggard but his eyes burning with triumph. Well, well, he called out, right on schedule. I have to thank you, Sheriff, for making this so easy. Vaughn dismounted slowly, his hand away from his gun. It's over, Winters. Look around you. As if on cue, rangers emerged from hiding places along the ridge and behind rocks, rifles trained on Winters and his men. Harold's face contorted with rage. "A trap. Surrender now," Vaughn said calmly. "You're outnumbered and outgunned." For a moment it seemed Harold might actually surrender. Then, with a howl of fury, he spurred his horse directly toward the stagecoach, firing wildly. Everything happened at once. The Rangers returned fire. One of Harold's men fell from his horse. The other threw down his weapon and raised his hands. And Harold, hit by at least 2 bullets, still managed to reach the stagecoach door. He wrenched it open, his face a mask of blood and hatred. "If I can't have you," he growled, raising his gun toward Felicity, "no one will." A single shot rang out not from Harold's gun, but from the small derringer in Felicity's steady hand. Harold staggered backward, a look of utter disbelief on his face as he clutched his chest. Then he crumpled to the ground. In the stunned silence that followed, Vaughn rushed to the stagecoach. "Felicity, are you hurt?" She shook her head, the derringer still in her hand. "No, I'm fine." Her voice was remarkably calm. "Is he?" Vaughn checked Harold's pulse and nodded grimly. "He's gone." One of the Rangers approached. "It was a clean shoot, Sheriff. Self-defense, plain and simple." No jury in Texas would say otherwise. Vaughn helped Felicity from the stagecoach, holding her close as the reality of what had just happened washed over her. She trembled in his arms, but her voice remained steady. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." "Yes," Vaughn agreed, pressing his lips to her forehead. "It's over, and now we can begin." They returned to Fort Concho that same day, bringing news of Harold Winters' death. Martha greeted them with tears of relief and joy, embracing Felicity as if she'd returned from the dead. "I knew you had courage, girl," she said, holding Felicity at arm's length to inspect her. "But I never realized just how much." That night, as Felicity lay in bed, exhaustion and relief battling within her, she heard a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Vaughn standing there, his expression solemn. "I couldn't sleep," he explained. "I needed to make sure you were really all right." She opened the door wider, inviting him in. They sat together on the edge of her bed, not speaking for a long moment. "I killed a man today," Felicity finally said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. Vaughn took her hand. "You did what you had to do. He gave you no choice. I know, and I don't regret it." She looked up at him, her eyes clear. "That's what troubles me. Shouldn't I feel something? Remorse? Horror? Anything?" "You're feeling relief, Felicity. Relief that a monster can't hurt you or anyone else ever again. There's no shame in that." He squeezed her hand gently. "The horror and the remorse may come later, and if they do, I'll be there to help you through it." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "When do you have to return to San Angelo?" "In a few days. There's paperwork to file about Winters, and I've been away from my post too long already." He tilted her chin up to meet her gaze. "But I was hoping you might consider coming with me." "To San Angelo," he nodded. "Martha says you've learned everything she can teach you. You could open your own shop in San Angelo. The town could use a good seamstress." He hesitated. "And I could use, well, I'd like to have you near." Felicity smiled, the first genuine smile since the confrontation with Harold. "I'd like that too." 2 weeks later, Felicity Adams stood on the porch of a small but charming house on the outskirts of San Angelo. It had belonged to Vaughn's parents, he'd explained, and had stood empty since their passing years ago. "It needs work," he admitted as he showed her around. "But it has good bones, as my mother used to say." Felicity walked from room to room, envisioning what could be. The front parlor could easily be converted into a small shop. The kitchen was spacious enough for her needs, and the bedroom, with its large windows facing east, would catch the morning light perfectly. "It's wonderful," she said honestly. "But Vaughn, I can't accept this. It's too much." It's not a gift, he clarified quickly. It's an investment in you, in your business. He looked slightly embarrassed, and selfishly in keeping you close to San Angelo, to me. She approached him, placing a hand on his chest. You've already given me so much. That first day when I had nothing but my shawl, you gave me everything I needed to start over. I gave you what anyone with decency would have, he corrected gently. No, you gave me more than that. You gave me hope, a chance, your trust. She smiled up at him. And now your heart. He covered her hand with his own. You've had my heart from the beginning, Felicity Adams. And you've had mine. She stretched up on her toes to press a soft kiss to his lips. Yes, I'll accept the house as an investment in our future. 4 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Felicity stood in the bedroom of that same house, Martha fussing with the simple white gown they had created together. Something old, Martha said, carefully draping Felicity's mother's blue shawl around her shoulders. Something new. She handed Felicity a pair of delicate pearl earrings. Something borrowed. A lace handkerchief was pressed into Felicity's hand, and something blue. She touched the shawl again with a smile. From the church in town, bells began to ring. It's time, Martha said, tears glistening in her eyes. My brother is the luckiest man in Texas, and if he ever forgets it, you send word and I'll come straighten him out. The small church was filled with people from San Angelo and Fort Concho. Felicity walked down the aisle alone, her mother's shawl around her shoulders, toward Vaughn, who waited for her with a look of such love and pride that it brought tears to her eyes. As they exchanged their vows, Felicity thought of how far she had come from that desperate day when she'd fled Harold Winter's farm with nothing but a shawl. She had gained so much since then: independence, confidence, a business of her own, friends, and now, a husband who respected and loved her for exactly who she was. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vaughn leaned down to whisper in her ear, I love you, Felicity Mackenzie. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. And I love you, Sheriff Mackenzie. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and dancing and laughter. Martha had outdone herself with the preparations, insisting that her only brother would have a proper wedding feast. As evening fell, Vaughn and Felicity slipped away from the festivities to the house that was now their shared home. On the porch, he swept her into his arms. Welcome home, Mrs. Mackenzie, he said, carrying her over the threshold. Inside, a fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, warming the cozy parlor that now served as Felicity's shop during business hours. Vaughn set her gently on her feet, but kept his arms around her waist. Are you happy? He asked, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. Happier than I ever thought possible, she answered honestly. And you? His smile was answer enough, but he added, I have everything I could ever want right here. As Vaughn bent to kiss her, Felicity thought about all she had gained since that desperate flight from Harold Winter's farm. She had arrived in San Angelo with nothing but a shawl, frightened and alone. Now she stood in her own home with a thriving business, friends who had become family, and a husband who had given her not just material security, but love, respect, and a partnership of equals. The blue shawl still rested around her shoulders, a reminder of where she had come from. But it was no longer the only thing she possessed. Thanks to Vaughn Mackenzie, she had everything she would ever need. 2 years later, Felicity sat on the front porch of their home, her mother's blue shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a small bundle in her arms. Inside the bundle, a tiny face with Vaughn's nose and her eyes peeked out, blinking sleepily in the afternoon sunlight. Is he asleep? Vaughn asked softly, joining her on the porch swing. Almost, Felicity replied, smiling down at their son. They had named him James after Vaughn's father, and at 3 weeks old he was already the center of their world. Vaughn put his arm around her, gazing down at their child with undisguised wonder. "He's perfect, just like his mother." Felicity leaned into her husband's embrace, a contentment she once thought impossible filling her heart. Her seamstress shop was thriving, with 2 young women apprenticing under her. Vaughn continued his work as sheriff, though he had taken to training a deputy who could take over more responsibilities as their family grew. Martha visited regularly from Fort Concho, spoiling her nephew shamelessly and bringing news from their friends there. Life had settled into a rhythm of work and love and family that brought Felicity joy every day. "What are you thinking about?" Vaughn asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Felicity smiled, adjusting the shawl around herself and the baby. "I was thinking about how far we've come, how much has changed since that day I fled from Harold's farm." Vaughn's arm tightened around her. "You were the bravest woman I'd ever seen, standing there in the street with nothing but that shawl and your determination." "I didn't feel brave. I was terrified." She looked up at him. "But you changed that. You gave me a chance to be more than just a victim. You gave me everything I needed to become who I am now." "You always had it in you, Felicity. I just provided the opportunity." His eyes, still as kind as the day they'd met, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "And in return, you gave me everything I never knew I needed. A purpose beyond just upholding the law. A home that's more than just a place to sleep. A family of my own." Little James stirred in his mother's arms, making tiny sounds of contentment. Felicity adjusted her hold, marveling as she often did at the perfect little person they had created together. "I never thought I could be this happy," she admitted. "After everything with Harold, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd never trust anyone again, much less love them." "And now," Vaughn prompted, his voice soft, "now I know that the worst moments of our lives don't define us. It's what we do afterward, the choices we make, the love we give and receive." She leaned up to kiss him gently. "You taught me that, Vaughn Mackenzie." As the sun began to set over San Angelo, casting long shadows across their porch just as it had on the day they'd met, Felicity savored the moment, the weight of her child in her arms, the solid presence of her husband beside her, the blue shawl still wrapped around her shoulders. Once it had been her only possession, her sole comfort in a time of desperate flight. Now it was just one thread in the rich tapestry of her life, a life filled with love, purpose, and the quiet joy of belonging. She had fled with just her shawl, and the cowboy had indeed given her everything she would need. But what she had found along the way was something even more precious, the strength that had been within her all along, waiting for the right moment and the right man to help her discover it.